Hey, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Hi, Councilor Edwards.
Hi. Get in the order and we'll get started literally in the next 2 minutes. Just making sure I get it all.
Good
set.
afternoon. I'll be with you in a second.
I think there's a bunch of counselors still in the attendees box.
Okay. Two.
I see there's a call-in number in the attendees. Do we know who that is?
Let me.
Yeah, Counselor, that's Sabino. He wasn't able to get to a camera right now, but that was him. If we can let him in.
Thank you.
I'm muted. No, I am muted. No, I'm not muted. I am, well, no, I'm muted now.
No, you're not muted.
Okay, bye.
Okay. Get this. Okay. I have Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Bach, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Mejia, Councilor O'Malley. Am I missing any counselors?
I think Braden was here.
I do that every time. I'm so sorry, Councilor Brayden. I'm so sorry. Okay, let me do this. Try to get the order right. Let's see. Mhm. Mhm. We have a little bit technical trying to work to get the interpreter on, so there'll be a slight delay. And when I know she's ready to go, we'll start, okay? I'll just wait for Carrie to let me know.
Sorry for the delay. We'll just get started and I'll try to add her as we get going because I don't want to hold things up if I'm not going to be able to get it going.
No problem. So when she gets on, Carrie, let me know. We will introduce her as being here, and then she'll come on, and then we can do a summary of what we talked about that she can interpret to catch any folks up. Okay?
Absolutely. She's actually here. She's in the wings. I'm just trying to do the technical stuff on this end. So I'll let you know about that.
All right. Well, for everyone else, I think we should go ahead and get started. And again, like I said, we'll make sure that when we get everyone all the interpretive services set up, we'll go ahead from there to summarize and make sure everyone is caught up. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. Friday, January 29th, 2021. We're here today for a virtual working session on docket 0155, an act relative to the office of mayor in the city of Boston. Councilor Arroyo sponsored this proposal, and it is referred to the committee on January 13th. The committee held a lengthy hearing on January 26th, 2021, this past Tuesday, where public comment was taken. The home rule petition will amend the City of Boston's charter by providing that if a vacancy occurs in the city of Boston, in the office of the mayor in the year 2021, the president of the city council will become the acting mayor for the remainder of the unexpired term. Under current charter provisions, section 13 of the Acts of 1948 is amended. If the office of the mayor becomes vacant before March 5th, 2021, the city council will be required to call for a special election to fill the vacancy. The purpose of this working session will be to address the specific language of docket 0155. Quick reason why we're on Zoom. We have, as you all know, we are in the governor, issued an executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law, relieving public bodies of certain requirements and allowing us to then conduct our business on Zoom while at the same time accounting for the public safety crisis that we're in. So the public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Xfinity 8 RCN 82 Verizon 964. Public testimony will not be taken at this working session, but written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. This home rule petition, again, as I stated, essentially what it will do. Sorry, I don't want to repeat that. So participating today on behalf of the administration is Sabina Palante, manager, head of assistant registrar of the Boston Elections Department. And I believe we will be joined by Michelle Tassinari, the director of elections at the Secretary of State. I have received an absence letter from Councilor Baker that I will read into the record now. January 29, 2021. Dear Councilor Edwards, please be advised that I will not be in attendance at today's Government Operations Working Session docket 0155, an act relative to the office of mayor in the city of Boston. I will be watching the recording. Please read this matter into the public record. Sincerely, Frank Baker, Boston City Councilor, District 3. Okay. So, as I stated, we are doing a working session. That means we came here to work. As for folks' education, Tuesday was centered on the public and centered on their voice and making sure that they had the opportunity to express what was clear, overwhelming support for not having a special election this year. And so now we are going to go and look at the specific vehicle, the home rule petition offered by Councilor Arroyo, and the language therein to get to those goals. Again, this is now more centered on the councilors and us coming to consensus, us asking each other questions, us clarifying language and mitigating and working on ways in which we can come to a consensus. That's the goal of a working session. We want to make sure that what we send and what we vote on has the most votes and is ideally unified in its message to the State House and the mayor. So it also, part of this working session is to mitigate changing circumstances. For example, what existed before may change literally in a matter of days. I was just informed that February 4th will actually be the confirmation hearing for our mayor or Secretary of Labor, the day after we will be voting for this. So it is imperative that everyone comes here to work because this has got to move. This has got to move. So I also wanted to, again, as I stated, Tuesday was centered on public testimony and the why and the overall goals. Today is about the language. And unlike my friends in the State House, us municipal officers, we got to show our work because of open meeting laws. We will actually show how much and how hard we work. Not to say that the State House doesn't work hard. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we get to show it. And we can work on that too if any of them would like to discuss open meeting laws. Again, my goal is consensus. My goal is the most vote. And so what we'll do is part of the working session is because Councilor Arroyo is the lead sponsor, I'm going to give the mic to him where Councilor Arroyo could talk about the process, how he got to his conclusions, how he got to the language. And ideally, Councilor Arroyo, if you could just walk through the draft, like this section, you don't have to, read it out loud, as you know, but if you wanted to just kind of break down, this is what this does, this is what this does, this is what this was, this is what this does, meeting the goals that you had when you drafted it. And then we're going to go to counselors after that and ask those questions and get to work. So I'm going to forego introductory comments because I want, like I said, this is a working session and we're going to get to work. So Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm gonna I think we all went to that hearing. I believe everybody was there, so everybody sort of knows the reasons why. So I'm not gonna get into the reasons why, but I do want to get into the language for this and sort of what went into the thinking about how this was set up and what went into the thinking about what I would like to come out of this. Mm-hmm. And so we have section 1 and section 2. It's very simple. It's first paragraph, second paragraph.
Arroyo, before you continue, I forgot to confirm. I hope all of the counselors have the draft in front of them.
Oh yeah, that would be important.
Let's just before we go into that, I think all the counselors should have the draft, and as well as I believe it's section 13 in front of them. So give me a minute, Councilor Arroyo, and let's make sure we're all on that same page. Okay.
Certainly.
So counselors, again, I'm going to give a minute for you to have both.
Did we get sent a draft, Madam Chair?
I believe we did, but I will have Christine up it in your inboxes.
Yes, Counselor, I sent the login and the draft of the docket, and section 13 was sent in a separate email
Okay.
to all the counselors.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
2 p.m. So we should have a 2 p.m. email with the docket, which is the draft we're going to be looking at. And then I have just a section 13 that was just sent out. Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, just one question. I have my hand raised. Is for Councilor Arroyo had just referenced section 1 and section 2, and we're reading section 13. Can we get a copy of section 1 and section 2?
Oh, to be clear, I'm not reading section 1, section 2 of the city charter. I mean the
petition. Okay, I got you. Okay.
Section 1 and the section.
I withdraw. My bad. I'm just trying to see if we were dealing with a different document.
No worries.
So important to just make sure we're all looking at the same piece of paper. Right now, Councilor Arroyo is walking us through the docket 0155, the draft home rule petition. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so to be clear, the actual home rule petition has a 1 page and a 2nd page. First page has the whereases. Second page has a few of those whereases, but also has the actual changes that we're seeking. And that's section 1 and section 2. For the sake of brevity, section 1 specifically states, I'm going to go right to the point of it. If a vacancy in the office of the mayor occurs in the year 2021, the president of the city council shall become acting mayor for the remainder of the unexpired term. Section 2 provides that the provisions of this act shall take effect immediately upon passage. Those are the 2 sections. When we were putting this together, the concept here was, I believed personally that a special election would be harmful for the city of Boston for a number of different reasons. That makes up the whereases. I think we've all heard from the community, so I don't feel the need to keep repeating over and over what those issues are. So the second part of that was, beyond feeling that there was an issue that we had to address, the next step was, as folks know, a home rule petition has to go through the mayor, the House, the Senate, and to the governor. The next step was to make sure that we crafted something that was legally sound, that had precedence, that would make it all the way to the governor's desk for signature as quickly as we possibly could, understanding the time frame that we were in. Lawrence has already done this. And what Lawrence did essentially is their charter is a little different than ours. but it had one thing that could happen prior to a date, and another thing that could happen if they were on another different time frame, similar to us. March 5th is sort of our cutoff date. After March 5th, everything that this home rule petition would seek to do is what the charter already does. It's not a charter rewrite. It just says if he left before March 5th, we would be forced to have a special. What we're asking in this home rule petition is that what would have occurred after March 5th is what we do, because that would eliminate the special election. What Lawrence had was similar. They had a part 1 that they were seeking to avoid, but their charter offered a second option, and they sought to get that done. So that's what they ended up going with, the second option that eliminated the special election for them. That made it through the House, the Senate, and the governor signed it. And just, I believe, early this week, I believe it was Monday, the judiciary upheld it. And so what I'm seeking to do here is follow the precedent of what already exists. We all know that home rule petitions that go to the legislature sometimes go there to die. And I think when we have the precedent of something that has already moved through the legislature, the precedent of something that's moved through the legislature quickly, changes to what they've already done in terms of changes to our home rule petition that don't mirror what exactly they followed when it came to what Lawrence was attempting to do, I believe will actually lead to either a holdup on getting this passed, which we can't afford, or it not getting passed and it getting rejected. And so I'm happy to hear folks' thoughts and ideas and things of that nature in terms of the language, but specifically the purpose here was to do away with the special election that this was calling for due to the multitude of reasons expressed, but also to do so in a way where the House and the legislature and the Senate and the governor could get on board quickly and could approve this quickly. And so that was the purpose of that. I have heard folks, and I want to be public about this, I've heard folks say, what about just changing this permanently? And I will tell you that I am on board with the idea of changing this permanently. I just do not believe that this emergency home rule petition is the place to do that. If folks are listening and they're saying, I want to change this permanently, I will join you in that. I will even, if you want me to draft that up and write that and do that, I will do that with you. But I don't believe that this emergency home rule petition is the way or the place to do it. And so with that, I'm happy to cede to the floor and see if there's folks who have any thoughts or questions specifically.
Thank you very much. And just to let folks know, in terms of the procedure and how this goes, so that they're curious, the working session, we will be having a vote on the 3rd. But the way this works is we come to consensus. I believe we will today. And I draft, as the committee chair, I draft up the committee report and summarizing all this whole process, and then present the consensus version to the body for a vote on February 3rd. So that's the next step, in case people are curious. Councillor Bach.
Thank you. Thanks. Do I have the floor now, Madam Chair?
You do.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to the sponsor, Councillor Arroyo. I very much want to concur with a lot of what's been said. You know, I think we want something that can sail through at the state level. And I'd say what matters on that front is that we have as strong a consensus as possible in this body that results in a unanimous or near unanimous vote. And also that we send up something that doesn't have drafting issues. My goal is the same as the sponsors, and I think most of the public, as we discussed, to pass a home rule petition that eliminates the special election in case the mayor leaves this month, maybe quite soon, and follows the procedures laid out in our charter for if the mayoral vacancy had occurred on March 6th. That's how the sponsors consistently describe the legislation, including today and at the hearing on Tuesday. It's not, however, currently how the legislation as drafted actually works. And I think we should make that reality match the description. And I'm hopeful we're going to be able to get agreement on that. Because this is going to be a technical conversation, I actually made a quick slide deck, Madam Chair, and I was going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yes. And just a reminder to folks, we and to Councillor Bach, appreciate the goal of making efficient in the conversation, but we also don't want to. We want to make sure we're also having a good, robust one for everyone to ask questions to. And Councillor, yeah, that's all for now. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So like I said, I think, can everybody see this? Yes, someone.
Mm-hmm. I can see it.
Sorry, I can't see you all now that I'm doing this. So I think, as Councillor Arroyo has explained, right, the charter's got two options in terms of what happens in a mayoral vacancy. vacancy, an option A and an option B. And those aren't two options you get to pick between usually. It's option A if you're in a certain time window, option B if you're in a different time window. And the goal here is not to rewrite the charter, but to do what the charter says we would do after March 5th. So if you go, let me see, there we go. So this is in front of counselors, but section 13 is the section of our charter that deals with a mayoral vacancy. And option A is what would, if we don't pass a home rule, happen if the mayors were to leave next week, right? Would be option A, we're within 16 months after a regular municipal election. And so we would call a special municipal election. That's what we're seeking to avoid. Option B would be if it occurs at a different time, then the new mayor would get elected at large in the next regular municipal election. So that's what we're trying to switch to. Agreed so far with the sponsor's characterization of what we're trying to achieve. But I think it's really important to draw everyone's attention to this highlighted yellow section of section 13, which says a person elected mayor under either of the foregoing provisions, so either option A or option B, takes the oaths required by section 11A as soon as conveniently may be after the issuance to him of his certificate of election. One sidebar is that when we do actually do charter reform, we need to fix the heavily gendered language that's throughout the document. But the upshot of that section, which applies to both option A and option B in our charter, is that if we postpone the election to the regular cycle in November, the person who is elected mayor should then take over in November as soon as the results are certified. That's our normal charter process. And you can see here, this is a picture of Tom Menino getting sworn in on November 16th in '93, about a week after he won that election when the results were certified. So this is the language that we've got down in black and white about how it should work if we're choosing option B in our charter in section 13. The trouble with the current home rule petition language is that it's actually creating an option C. So option A would be the charter. We'd go ahead and have a spring, summer special election. Mayor would get sworn in summer 2020 right after the results are certified. That's what we're trying to avoid. Option B, the alternative charter option, November regular election, mayor sworn in November 2020. That's, I would contend, what we should be switching to because that's the charter provision. Right now, what the HRP has us doing is switching to a November regular election, but then swearing the mayor in January 2020. And I think that's not consistent, to the sponsor's point, with the precedent of Lawrence that we're talking about, where you choose the sort of option B in the charter and then stick to it as closely as possible. You don't rewrite the charter and you just go with what would happen after March 5th. So I think it's important for us, in the spirit of making an emergency change, to really stick to the charter as closely as possible. And I think, I'm sure that, this was a section of section 13 that I did not see when I first read it. And I think we all know that even when things are down in black and white, it's easy for people in good faith to just miss something. And so not trying to castigate the sponsor on that, I think would be unfair and unkind to hold it against people when you just miss something. But I think knowing that's what the point of our working sessions are, that seeing this, we need to fix the language so that it's truly option B. Now, I think the way that we ended up here has to do with the drafting approach that was taken originally. If you look at the original HRP language that was proposed on January 8th, I'm including the full language here, a bunch of which subsequently got cut because I think it helps us to understand how we ended up where we are. So the original language was suggesting that the council president would become acting mayor for a term terminating in January, and then then their seat would be replaced, actually, funnily enough, through a special election. That's what that provision would entail. So we talked about that, cut that piece out. But I think and the green change, which got made for the 13th, is the one little contribution that the Secretary of State's office made, which was to just say, oh, the end of the unexpired term instead of first Monday of January. But I think that was a simplification of language rather than a wholesale approval of the HRP by the Secretary of State's office. And I think at the time it was proposed, everyone, the Secretary of State's office and myself and Councilor Arroyo, everybody was missing the fact that the charter itself sets up a takeover in November. And I think that that there's a couple of sort of issues that we're left with even after having simplified the language here somewhat. So one is this point that there's this original misunderstanding about when the acting mayor switches to the elected mayor in our charter by default, which is right after the election happens. The other thing, and I think it's caused a lot of confusion around the city, is this language about like shall become acting mayor, and then below the language we cut about upon the qualification of the president of the council as acting mayor. I think there's a very natural thought that the acting mayor is like a independent job. But the way our charter, and frankly, there's a lot of logic to that, the way our charter sets it up is as a function of the council president for so long as there's a mayoral vacancy. So if you go to 11B, the president of the city council shall perform the duties of the mayor. If they're not around, they get performed said duties by someone else. And then the person upon whom such duties will devolve will be called acting mayor, right? This is the only place that acting mayor is defined in our charter, as you may have seen the Globe mention. So I think that what's confusing about that, because a lot of people, none of us, I think, really who had spent enough time with the charter to understand that the council president would also be the acting mayor and stay the district councilor, and it's kind of an unusual structure, but it's what we have. And because it's an unusual structure in the charter that's already subject to some legal back and forth, what you don't want to do, I think, is to further complicate that legal analysis with a temporary one-year act that talks about the president of the council becoming acting mayor, because that language of becoming as opposed to sort of serving and doing these duties it's a legal distinction. And so I think, and then there's the added fact that this section here that we've got in the current HRP actually never cancels the special election. It sort of does by implication. We assume that if the council president is becoming acting mayor for the remainder of the unexpired term, we're saying we're not having a special, but we're not technically saying that here. And I think that you could end up with, again, some weird unclarity of language. So there's sort of three problems with the current language. So one is that it's departing from section 13's option B, creating this option C by pushing the transfer of power to an elected mayor back 2 additional months, as opposed to what the charter would do after March 5th. So I think that's just a drafting mistake, and we need to go back to what the charter would do after March 5th, that being kind of the standard that we're trying to emulate from Lawrence. And I think consistent with the instinct that you should change the charter as little as possible, but deal with the current emergency. It also introduces this temporary one-time language that could further confuse legal interpretation of section 11B in regard to the status of the acting mayor. And it doesn't explicitly cancel the special election, it just does it by implication. So what would be better? I think probably it would make more sense to have a simple sentence that points directly to section 13, option B. So there's sort of 2 different ways I think you could say that. I think you'd keep the same language about, all right, we're in the year 2021. You would say explicitly the vacancy shall not be filled by a special municipal election. And then you say it should instead be filled according to the provision of section 13 that begins at line 13. That seems like a little weird. Why would you describe it that way? It's actually kind of State House protocol that when you have an old act where they didn't do kind of sub clauses within a section like this, and there's actually different provisions, you literally go back to the original acts. I pulled it. This is the acts of 1951, and you number the lines within the section. And then you say, okay, so the provision we want is the one that starts at a mayor shall be elected at large at the next regular municipal. And what's nice about just having a law that points you there is it means you're never going to have this problem of diverting from the charter language, because you're just saying, use the charter language, just start here and ignore the bit about the conditions of the time. And it's just going to be neater. Another option, it's sort of a little bit more elegant in layman's terms, a little bit less technical, would be to just say it shall instead be filled as though the vacancy had occurred on the 6th day of March of that year. So that's basically, putting into what we've been saying as rhetoric into law and saying, yeah, let's just follow the procedures as though it's the 6th of March. I think those two things would have the same impact, but there are two different ways of sort of solving for this that I would suggest. That is the main thing that I really want to stress, and I really wanted to highlight the issue about what the charter actually says about when the acting mayor is meant to transition to the elected mayor. But I do want to also turn to the question that Councilor Arroyo raised about considering permanent language. So although there are special COVID-related reasons, yeah.
By any chance, most of as riveting and amazing and is like, oh gosh, I mean, I better.
Awesome.
Better than Scandal, I swear. I do think it would help us if you sent this around. Do you have a copy of this that we can?
Yeah, sure. I bet Emily from my staff is watching. Emily, can you send this?
So before you go into breaking down this section, okay, could we just take a minute?
Go back into this section? Sure.
So that we are all, we have this.
Yeah, what would you, let me make sure that Emily on my team is sending it over.
You want to send it to Christine?
Can you send it to Christine O'Donnell?
So this is a lot.
I'll send it right out to you once Emily sends it to me.
Okay.
And just please, counselors, please do not respond among yourselves via the email. We don't want to have a violation of the open meeting law. Thank you.
Okay. So just, we'll take a brief moment to get this to everybody. And I apologize to my colleagues that I didn't request this. It's very detailed.
Well, I mean, it's working.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm not, it's good. It's a good thing. I just want to make sure that, you know, as a slide is going through, you know, there's parts that are, may want to be referred to. So,
okay. I just found it in my inbox and sent it over to Christine. So hopefully Christine will have it in a second.
Christine?
Just give me one more second.
Are we all set?
Everyone should have it now, hopefully. Did it go through?
I have it. Anyone else?
I got it.
Okay. I'm assuming everyone has it. So, what slide number are you on, Councillor Bach?
I'm on the second slide number. It's just the section 13.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Bach.
Sure. Did you want me to go back over any of this, or is it okay if I just talk?
No, I want to do. I have a feeling. I have a feeling that this might be a reference document throughout this conversation. So I wanted everyone to have it, and for you to start on. I think you were on option 2.
Yeah, on objective 2. So this is the consider.
So what number is this? What number is this one?
This one. Sorry, I don't have the slide numbers printed. It's like it'll be 2/3 of the way through.
I have it at 12, I think, 12 of 17. This is for my colleagues. Everyone, I can't see anyone either because with the screen share. So I'm assuming everyone knows it's 12 of 17 and we're starting with objective 2. Counselor Bach.
Sure. So, so I think it's worth discussing the fact that, so there are special COVID-related reasons for an emergency 2021 only home rule petition. And I think Councilor Arroyo is right that like there are good reasons to try to make sure that we get this through ASAP, and that we wouldn't want to slow it down. And he and I talked about this early on, and also with the Secretary of State's office about kind of, you know, how do you make sure that it moves quickly? And so I get the idea of Lawrence moved it at 2021. However, I also think that we have learned just at looking at this year how crazy it is to have a special mayoral election in a regular mayoral election year. And it's really because of the overlapping schedules that it creates between the special and the regular. So I do think there's some logic to looking at improving the situation once for all. It sort of makes it like not a one-off for this year. It says we've seen a problem, we're going to fix it. Are there a million other problems in our charter that we should also be fixing? Yes. And I think like even just on the election side, there are a bunch, and that's a longer term conversation. But I do think this is one that we can maybe make a quick intervention on. And the converse being, you know, would a permanent change be slow to the State House? So I just want to quickly run over why I think there's a kind of permanent overlapping elections problem here. So if you take the 120 to 140 day required window for a special mayoral election, a mayoral vacancy anytime in 2021, even on January 1st, would ensure that the deadline to pull papers to be a mayoral candidate in the regular election would fall before the special election results were decided. So I ran the numbers for this year. This is just using the charter dates of when things have to happen by. So formal election calendars come out from the election department, not from me, but this is based on the counting of the Tuesdays in the charter. The deadline to pull nomination papers would be May 11th. And if you go down and you imagine, what if the mayor had left on January 1st? And we'd actually convened a special early Wednesday council meeting on the 6th because we didn't have our first until the 13th. Say we'd done that and we'd immediately issued an order for a special election. Literally the earliest special election final we could have had would have been Tuesday, May 11th, which of course means polls close at 8 p.m. and you've had the deadline to submit your name to be considered for mayor for the regular election earlier that day. And that's the earliest possible calendar. I think what's crazy about that is, you know, obviously when people run for office, they think about what they could do, but I think they also are reasonably asked to look at what is being done right now and who's in the office and sort of to make a comparison between them and the incumbent. And so to have to decide whether you're pulling papers, even though it's not the end of the process, but it is a necessary first step in the process, to have to make that decision before you know who the incumbent is, I just think it doesn't lend itself to the most thoughtful composing of a field. And so my instinct would be to take this moment to make a simple insertion in section 13 that would just say, if it's a mayoral election year, we're not doing this. It doesn't make sense. It wouldn't make it. We don't think it's going to make sense if it's mid-February, and we don't really think it would have made sense even if it was mid-January. So I think you'd insert a sentence like this. This would be how the HRP language would work. And then this point about slowing passage. So I think there's two different ways that we could just like try to get this fix made right now without slowing passage. So one would be to insert this section that makes the permanent change as a standalone section in the home rule petition, but to provide a section in the home rule petition that allows the State House to edit. So that would be something where if we thought the State House might not want to make the permanent change, they could just cut it out. Or if we didn't want the State House to be able to edit the petition, then I think it might be interesting for us as a council to file the permanent change as a separate parallel home rule petition and send them both up to the State House and say, hey, we'd love it if you pass both of these because we definitely want to solve our 2021 problem. And we also think we should solve this prospectively for future councils. But that way, if they, you know, didn't see their way to making the permanent change now, it wouldn't hurt the short-term 2021 change. So in summary, and I'm sorry if I've run through a lot, I think the number one objective should be to keep as close to section 13 as possible. To just choose option B, really make sure that what we're doing is what would happen if we were after March 5th, and not write 1 year 2021 language that interacts with the definition of acting mayor in section 11B, so that we don't cause added confusion there. And I suggested those two different versions of a kind of simple sentence to just point us to section 13. Then I think a second objective would be to make a permanent section 13 fix to prevent a special mayoral election or regular mayoral election year, which again, I think if we do end up going the route of making the HRP editable, you could put it in without worrying about syncing the vehicle. State House could cut it out if they don't want it. Or you could do a parallel HRP that we send up at the same time that makes the permanent change. And that way, I feel like we would have done in a small way well by the next council that might face this situation. I also wanted to register on this page that I'd be open to the suggestions that I heard the Secretary of State's office make on Tuesday. So one was objective to make the HRP retroactively cancel a special election order in case the timing is tight. I think I've also heard that from you, Madam Chair.
Right.
And I agree that given the scheduling of the mayor's hearing, that seems like it might be highly advisable. And then I know the Secretary of State also recommended ensuring passage by allowing the State House to edit the HRP. And like I said above, if we go that route, it's another argument for putting the permanent piece in there. I also hear arguments against doing that. I'm sort of on the fence about that one. I think that I'm hopeful that if we have a strong consensus from this body behind language, that that we could ask the State House to pass it for us without amending. But I know the Secretary of State's office was registering that as a possible issue. So I think that is my whole, yes. Those are all of my slides and suggestions. And thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I can stop sharing the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So just for my colleagues, and while I appreciate the robust conversation, Councillor Bach, the language before us is what we're going to work on. And so I think I heard you say that you agreed that a permanent change in this particular vehicle was not recommended.
Unless it was paired with making it editable. So I think like if we were making it editable, we could put in the permanent change as well, because the issue I think with the permanent change suggestion is that it could slow the vehicle down.
Right.
So if we're letting the State House edit it, then we could put it in and they could just slash it if they don't like it. I have heard from some people at the State House the fact that a permanent change feels kind of more fair and consistent anyways. So I'm not sure. I think there might be folks there who actually like that. But I don't want, to Councilor Arroyo's point, I don't want to put something in that's gonna slow the vehicle, right? So I think if it's non-editable,
right,
then we should do it at something.
And for efficiency of this time here today, I actually agree that a permanent change requires maybe a longer conversation. I think you also proposed potentially having a parallel home rule petition that separates the two conversations.
Yeah, so I'm happy to focus more on the objective one stuff about cleaning up the language
today.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you agreed to that, because that's what I was going to say we're going to do. We're going to stay. We're going to leave the. I appreciate the bringing up the option 2. I don't, Councilor Rowley, unless you want to deal with option 2, making it permanent, I prefer to just stick with the language before us, and that conversation be tabled for another day.
And I would agree with that. I would just say that we had overwhelming support for this home rule petition as written, as expressed to folks. That did not involve a conversation about making the changes permanent. And I will just say that though I have found, and I agree, I actually support making these changes permanent in a separate vehicle. I have found that is not nearly as unanimous as folks might think that is. And I think that does require some conversation with community. It's not a matter of just putting something together in my mind and running it out together. I think that does require a process. And what I am actually saying to folks here is I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to write that in conjunction with, it looks like Kenzie, Councilor Bach has put a lot of thought into this. And so I'm happy to write that with her and do that as a separate vehicle. But I don't think that it makes sense for us to discuss that with this, specifically because, just to be 100% honest, and I know we probably have state representatives watching this, I have very little interest in giving the State House the ability to edit this document, because there's no way to limit what they could or could not edit. And I think that that's not a can of worms that I would like to open, frankly, on this document.
So let's just leave the whole editing language separate from this. For my colleagues, the conversation on what things we're going to make permanent will be tabled for today. Let's be clear. It is true as we did not have a robust conversation about that. It's not amongst my colleagues all desired. And I think we want to make sure that we're dealing with this. So I, again, appreciate Councilor Bakke bringing it up and the arguments for it. And I echo what you and Councilor Arroyo have said. It is something that we need to fix. So I'll just say that. And the same way I fix and we do things is the hearing or session. So we will do that on that. Okay. Just in continuing and on with other counselors, just to make sure we get all voices in here on suggestions. Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, thanks to the lead sponsor, you hosting, and the great work of our colleague, Kenzie Bach, phenomenal, and stuck the landing. So cleaned up, I think, some of the concerns and questions that I had. So obviously want to thank everyone's participation. I guess the first question is will it be coming out, Madam Chair, in a committee report, or is this sort of going to be a document as amended? What's your preference?
I'm sorry, Counselor, are you asking me what I'm going to do with the proposed
Yeah, just so
language?
from the working, so we're having a working session now. So based on, I guess, the suggested amendments that our colleague has just put forth, will that be something that will come out of sort of a committee report? Or will that be something that from the floor, you'll be recommending that Councilor Bach make those amendments and have Councilor Roy either accept the amendments or have our colleagues vote on them?
I'm hoping, Counselor Flaherty, that we come to consensus today in this working session.
That'd be great.
Because the goals.
So I will say that while it is in our ability to amend the charter further, it's my understanding that the purpose of the filed legislation is to waive the special election in an effort to protect the public health in light of COVID-19, and also to discourage voter fatigue and exorbitant costs to the city at a time when we need those very precious funds to be applied for an equitable recovery. So, and not incidental to that, obviously, extending the term of the acting mayor. So I'd be inclined to support the home rule petition, provided that it includes Councilor Bach's amendment that will allow the duly elected mayor of Boston. So if we're going to forego the special election and go to the regular election, then it's my desire to obviously the duly elected individual, whether it's the acting mayor or if it's a new person, that they be sworn in, and I guess through you to the election department. Not quite sure how long Sabino would foresee the election results being able to be certified, but I would love to see when that happens, that the residents and the voters of Boston get their choice, whoever that is, sworn in as soon as possible. So to that end, that's where I'm at. And again, thank the lead sponsor, thank Councilor Bach for her thoughtful and productive amendments, and thank you for sponsoring and hosting today, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sabino, we just had a quick question for you. How long does it take to certify election results?
For the municipal election, I'll have to check my records, but I believe on November either 16th or 17th is the date that will be certified. We do have to wait for any ballots that are postmarked by election day that we receive for any overseas voters up until the Friday after the 10 days after the election.
And that date is fairly consistent with the last time that the city of Boston elected an acting mayor as duly elected mayor of the city of Boston. So staying consistent with that, that is something obviously that as an at-large council I'd like to see happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it, Councilor Flaherty?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll obviously stay on. If anyone has any additional thoughts, I'd like to hear them.
Thank you. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Arroyo, for moving this home rule petition. And also thank you, very, very great thanks to my colleague, Councillor Bach. I think you display your talents and skill as a teacher of elucidating complicated ideas. So thank you so much. I don't have any further questions. I really am much clearer at this moment than I was this morning on this issue. So thank you all.
Are there any, do you have any thoughts about the language or the goals or?
I'm feeling my sense about, making a permanent change makes sense, but I think it's not I think we need to do it in a separate vehicle.
Mhm.
I think the idea of keeping it as simple as possible, the language, the one-liner seems very enticing. It might actually, it also not only is easy for us to understand, but also for the general public to get to understand it. Keeping the language simple is definitely one of my preferences. So I'm inclined to go for the one-liner, but either way, I think the modifications that Councillor Bach has suggested will work. And I also think, being cognizant of the fact that we want something that will pass easily, first of all, with good wide support from the council, but also that it will get through the State House easily as well without any delays. That's really preferable too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Mejia. You're muted.
No, I was just saying thank you to Councillor Bach for her incredible dissertation. It's always great to be schooled. So thank you for your thoroughness and your details. I am in line of having sat through 4 hours of testimony and listening to what people are asking for, I think that we have a responsibility to do what is going to move this work forward without any need for delay. And I think that some of the things that Councillor Bach is presenting, while it's good for us to be mindful of, I just don't feel like now is the time for us to have that conversation. And so I do agree with my colleagues in terms of just keeping it as simple as possible is the best course of action. And then I do have a quick question, and I'm curious about the November transition, and that's how the charter is written. And so I'm curious, was the Menino situation, was there an election year that year too? When they had that special election, was there already an election year? So it's very similar to that.
There was no special election that year. He just went straight to the general.
Right. So I think because there's already an election happening in September and November, right? Let's just keep things as simple as possible. And in terms of transitioning of the power, I don't think it makes sense for us to do the November situation. We already caused enough disruption in the whole situation. So I don't even, well, that's how it's written. I don't think that we need to do that. And in terms of the language, I think I'm going to follow Councillor Arroyo's lead. And I am here to ensure that I keep hearing the word consensus in this working session, and I've participated in many working sessions in the past in terms of consensus. And I just know that this council has a hard time reaching any consensus because we have so many different opinions and different constituency groups that we represent. But I will say that, I'm really looking to this council to do whatever it takes to ensure that we listen to the people who put us in office and that we can reach some consensus that will move us to where we need to be. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. We've actually been joined by, I believe, by the Secretary of State's office. I'm just going to go ahead and promote her to a panelist. And so if it's okay with my colleagues, I know she's on a limited amount of time, and I would prefer to be able to defer quickly to allow for her to, give some suggestions or thoughts and work in this working session. So for those who are still to ask questions, that's myself, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Flynn, I'm going to go ahead and allow for her to, for Ms. Tassinari to proceed.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Again, we're here to answer any questions that you might have. It does seem like I missed the beginning part where there may have been some new language. It's been quite a week of virtual meetings this week, next week, and and the like. So, we're here to offer support. If there's new draft language that you'd like us to look at, we're happy to take a look at it. And again, it seems like now it's a slight shift from what the original language was, which would be that the person who is elected in November serves out the remainder of the term and then the new term. If that's what I was just hearing for the last couple of minutes, is that accurate?
That's what's proposed.
Yeah. So I mean, it's certainly the prerogative of the city to take that, and again, I think now that we know somewhat of the timing of a vacancy, we're a little closer to knowing when a vacancy might occur, since a hearing has been scheduled on that, to try to add some language about what would happen if the vacancy occurs before this is passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I did hear your question, so Sabino, about the question from, I think it was from Councilor Flaherty, about the certification of the election. Under General Law, Chapter 54, Section 137, a city cannot certify the election until at least 10 days afterwards. And if a recount is requested, it cannot be certified until after that recount is complete.
Okay, so 10 days.
Yes.
And we had referenced actually some of your testimony during the hearing where you had mentioned there's certain level of flexibility possibly to be allowed for. Mm-hmm. And also again, the competing the race. I think Councilor Braden actually brought this question up, and you brought this up as well, as so what happens if, we have an order pending because the mayor left and the state house or the governor hasn't quite signed the home rule petition. And does the language right now, as stated, help to prevent a special election or in any way, shape, or form? So does it cancel, it cancels it, but does it cancel any pending ordered special elections as well, to make sure that there's no way, if it gets to the state house and there's any sort of delay, or if they just go through as fast as they can, but the mayor's already gone, that.
So I think honestly, there's two ways in which this could be done. One would be that it was, you don't necessarily need to include the language, as long as there is an understanding that while this is pending, that you'll somewhat delay the forthwith part. You could put that in there instead, because right now, if we're amending that specific section that says you shall forthwith call, you could say you'll give it a reasonable, and if the special act proposed home rule legislation is not passed within a certain period of time, you will call the election. Or you could do it the opposite way, to amend to do something that once the home rule, not change the forthwith language for this time, and instead say in a separate section that if a vacancy occurs before the home rule petition is filed and the council orders a special election, that order is automatically rescinded upon passage of this within a certain period of time. The one thing that you don't want to have happen is it sit out there for so long that you're starting the election process Because what if for some reason it doesn't get passed? Not that I think it won't. I think everyone seems to be on board that it should pass and should pass quickly, similar to the way the Lawrence bill did. But you just want to kind of cover yourselves for that possibility.
I'm going to go ahead and allow for clarifying to go through with my colleagues again. I know you're short on time, but just to be clear, there's two ways to deal with this, as I understood what you're saying, in the home rule petition itself or in the order that we push through. So maybe that's an easier conversation. We could leave the language in the home rule petition alone, and then any order that's supposed to come from our body, we could put in cautionary language or language that makes sure that there is a home rule petition pending and this order becomes effective only if it doesn't pass or something like that. But there's another vehicle technically not having to, again, I think to Councilor Arroyo's concerns, get too deep and muddy the waters with extra. We could actually, if the order has to come through, we could take care of it there. That was a question, sorry.
So yes, I think you could, but I do think you could do it as part of the home rule, not to specifically say that, well, to just leave it with the expectation that that you don't call an order, that this eliminates it, and that, so, I mean, as long as you're not putting in, I think that you could be able to do it so that it implies in there that the council doesn't call for one anyway. So not just that it's canceling and what it is, that you don't have to call for one. But in the home rule, or again, I think if you get an order for a special election, or if you get a vacancy, if you need to call for a special election, you could put right in that there's pending home rule legislation. This will only become effective in 2 weeks if this legislation doesn't pass.
Okay. So we'll start with the lead sponsor, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Sabino. Are you still there, Sabino?
Yes, I'm still here, Council.
Did I hear you correctly that the earliest we think a certification could happen is November 16th?
The reason why I threw that date in there is because of the ballots that we wait for after the, for the overseas. We have to set up a board meeting to count those ballots, and most likely will be on Monday, and then everything will be certified at the next board meeting. We could probably get that done a little bit sooner if we had to have a special board meeting to certify.
As a question, did we do anything if the legislature, which I hope they do actually do, create mail-in voting? Was there any added delay that we added to the counting process because of mail-in voting? Did we wait longer to get those ballots? Was there any process like that?
And for the past election, no. We still had to have the ballots counted at a certain time for the Secretary of State to certify those election results. Did not change that.
And then the swearing in date, if this were a normal, regularly scheduled election, would be January. It would be the first Monday in January?
I believe so.
So that'd be January 4th?
You need to check with Christine on that one.
Okay. I believe it's the first Monday. I think it's January 4th. And so we're talking about here like the difference of maybe 6 weeks or so, give or take. And so I guess from the standpoint of the language as it's brought forward from section 13, you know, my initial thought process on this was, in a state of emergency during a pandemic, the less amount of transfers of power that we have at once, the better it is for the city. And so the concern, frankly, that I heard over and over and over again at this hearing from folks who saw the bill sort of as written until January was with the lack of stability, the instability that it could create to do these sort of quick handoffs. And if what we're talking about is the difference of 6 or 7 weeks or 5 weeks, I think there is a greater question there about whether or not it makes sense for that process to happen in that way. But also, to be clear, my intention was to follow the charter as it creates this separate situation, right? So it has one situation and another situation. And so I'm sensitive to that as well. And I'm happy to hear specifically from folks how they feel about, kind of that difference. I already heard from Councilor Mejia, the stability concern. I can assume where other people feel about that. Councilor Bach did a whole slideshow on it, so I can assume where she stands on it. But everybody else, I can kind of gather where it's at. My question is whether or not it makes sense, because to be clear, Michelle Tassinari, who's here, and thank you so much for your time, did write these portions. And so I know that they're legally sound. The only question is, do we think that it makes sense to do that? Do we think it makes sense to keep it the way it's currently written? And I guess the question is, does it make sense to force that transition to happen within 16 or whatever that date is for I think it's November 2nd or November 4th is the election day, as currently. And so we would be talking about November 16th, possibly a little bit early. Sabino, just a question on this part. If we had a recount, obviously that's a process. We just had one. How long, because I don't know, maybe Councilor Mejia knows, how long was the recount process just for that at-large seat? When were we able to certify the results of our at-large election from the date of election?
Within 2 days.
Within 2 days, but how long was the count?
The counting period took almost 3 days. I believe we started it on Saturday and concluded on Monday afternoon.
So on what date was that? What actual date was that? Do you know?
I'd like to say the first week of December. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get it for you.
And I think the actual election was what, November 24th that year?
No, first Tuesday in November.
So what day was that?
Monday.
It was November 5th.
November 5th. So basically it took from November 5th until, did you say December 1st?
November
I'd like
21st.
to say this.
Sorry. I was
Go ahead.
traumatized.
You would know, Councilor Mejia.
I was traumatized by that situation, y'all. So these dates are ingrained in my brain. But we didn't. Yeah, go ahead. Sabino,
So I'm just trying to put together sort of what the numbers, on what the dates would be. Worst case scenario, we have a recount. I don't think anybody wants to go through that at all. But worst case scenario, we have a recount. What are we looking at for like the earliest certification date we might be looking at based on the precedent of history?
I believe we started the recount on December 7th. On a Saturday, concluded the recount on December 9th.
And the election was on November 5th.
That is correct.
Is there any difference in between the at-large councilor recounts where they had to do all of that, all the signatures and things like that? Is a mayoral recount immediate, or would they have to do the same thing with signatures and all that stuff? Because I remember that was the holdup.
It's the same thing.
So they would have to get signatures, get them all approved. So we'd be looking at, that sounds like almost a month if we went with a recount. So if there was a recount, we would be looking at December 16th as a transition time. Is that, or in that range?
Well, the reason why it was so late is because of the holiday that took place. We also had other deadlines that we were dealing with initiative petitions, and we couldn't cut our staff down to a staff that could not manage the recount and all of our other deadlines. That's why we came up with that date.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and you would know this, Sabino, better than anybody else, is what's the date range for the worst case scenario where we had to have a recount? If there was a recount, what is the date that we would be looking at as possibly the range of dates where you could see a certification of results if we had to do a mayoral recount?
I would say the same as what we did in 2019.
So
this is
sometime
a year that we're going to be faced with the same obstacles as we did in 2019 this year with initiative petitions after the mayoral election.
We would also have the new one of having to get signatures in a pandemic, which I don't think we had to do that last time either, right?
There was no pandemic in 2019 that I know of.
Yeah, so we didn't have to do the signature collection for the wards and the precincts in a pandemic on that one either.
That's correct, but we still had to get all those signatures, and Councilman Mejia did a wonderful job with those signatures and brought them in on the deadline, right before the deadline, as well as her opponents. They both brought them in.
And do you guys know how many signatures? It's 50 signatures per ward. It was over like 3,000 signatures just to complete it. And my fingers were frozen. We are not doing that again, ever.
Thank you. So Councilor Arroyo, just in terms of, I I kind of opened it up. I didn't know if you had any more questions, any questions for Ms. Tassinari.
So I'm glad to hear that there's a separate vehicle that we can do this in, because that's
Right.
very clarifying for me. I appreciated hearing that, because I didn't know this is uncharted water. So I appreciate very much the fact that we can do it in the actual forthwith, whatever that is, the order, whatever that is we have to do. I'm glad to hear that. And so that's obviously something that if we could do it in that vehicle, I think that would make the most sense.
So right now it looks like we're kind of making sure we separate without having to combine them all. For example, permanent change, separate vehicle, potential like a stopgap, as we kind of just called it casually between us, separate vehicle. And you prefer that, Councilor Arroyo? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you did a good job lip reading.
Thank you very much.
I had mine on mute.
Okay. Councilor O'Malley, I did make you wait. I apologize, but I wanted to make sure, while we had Ms. Tassinari here, Councilor Arroyo got to go in that moment too. Okay, sorry about that. Councilor O'Malley, then Councilor Flynn.
No worries at all. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate Councilor Bach's proposal today, which does modify things slightly. It also, in my opinion, puts this change more in line with what the charter says. And, I got a unique perspective on this because I believe I'm the only counselor who has won his or her seat through a special election. You hear my associate is with me, so you may hear her in the background as well. But in 2010, if you lived in JP or West Roxbury, you voted for 4 elections over the course of 4 months. There was the state primary in September, the city council preliminary in October, and then in November, there were 2 elections 2 weeks apart, state election, and then my final election, because that's what the charter had said. Now, I think the most compelling argument that's been made to cancel this special election, and I want to be clear, we're talking about how there's option A, there's option B, now there's option C. There really aren't options the way the charter is written. According to the charter, should Mayor Walsh leave when he's likely to leave, then we must call a special election. Obviously, there are circumstances that we are empowered to employ, which looks like we will be doing, that could change that. But I just want to be clear on that. Given the timing is set in such a way, and I was proof positive of that when there was a special election. Councilor Mejia had mentioned the 93 race, or had inquired about the 93 race. That election followed the charter to a T. And the fact of the matter is because Tom Menino won a full election, he was then sworn in on November 16th. Had Jim Brett prevailed, he would have been sworn in on that day. So I think that crucial change with Councilor Bach has put forward, getting rid of the special election and allowing for the swearing in to happen whenever that's certified, notwithstanding the points Councilor Royal brought up about there could always be a recount or delays, is the right approach. So I can support that, but I think simplicity is key. I would not support a wholesale change of the charter at this point. It's certainly worthy for more discussion and more conversation. As I said, I worry about changing the rules after the fact, but I think the most compelling argument, and Margot would agree, on why we should forego the special election this year is the fact, quite frankly, that state law prohibits us, as Registrar Piemonte told us and reminded us, state law prohibits us from just sending mail-in ballots or even ballot applications to would-be voters because we, in my opinion, very short-sightedly do not allow for no excuse absentee voting. So thank you for convening this, and thank you for your great work, Madam Chair, and colleagues at the state and city level. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to summarize, you support canceling the special election with the amended language, or at least the language that makes sure that there is a certification in November as in the charter.
That is right. That the proposal put forth by, or the amendment, I should say, to Councilor Royal's proposal put forth by Councilor Bach, or what I assume will be amendment, I'm supportive of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and thank you for your important work and leadership on this issue, along with the sponsor, Councilor Arroyo. I think Councilor Bach had excellent ideas and outlined this situation very well. So I want to acknowledge Councilor Bach for her work, impressive analysis on this. I agree that we should not have a special election, and looking forward to some of these great questions and ideas that are coming forward. In my number one concern is making sure that our immigrants in our city have a fair access in voting, along with persons with disabilities. So I want to make sure that there's also a public health component to this election as well, where we take into the fact that we have a lot of seniors, persons with disabilities, and immigrants that will be coming out. We want to make this election as fair and accessible to them as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have an opinion about the proposed amendment?
I would like to see the language, Madam Chair, as simple as possible.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just have a couple questions, and we'll again, for those of you who are tuning in to this riveting conversation, we are working. And again, I would encourage, you should give props to your municipal elected officials. We work on camera for all to see, unlike the folks at the State House who I'm sure work, but they just don't, no one gets to see them get to it. And I want to acknowledge Councillor Campbell has also joined us. Councillor Campbell?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I was sitting in the webinar version of this, and I apologize for being late. I had a conflict and was dealing with some illness, but that's another story. So I actually missed, unfortunately, Councillor Bach's suggested amendment, so I'll have to look into that. But just big picture, what exactly is it? I apologize for having to ask again, and if it's too complicated, I can, of course, look at the language.
You know what? I see Councillor Bach getting ready to roll that beautiful bean footage, but I'm going to make you just go to the one slide that shows option A, B, and C.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bach.
Bach, take it away, but screen share and option just right there, that one with a sentence,
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the, one second. Screen sharing has failed to start. Try again later.
Terry, I don't know if you have a Councillor Campbell. We actually also sent it also to all the councillors as well.
I can review it.
So one sec, let me try again. One sec. Let's give a. Okay, is that showing right now?
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Campbell.
Yes.
The thing I'd pointed out is that in the charter, I don't know if this was the one you meant, Councillor Edwards.
It is.
So in the charter, the option A we're under is one that sets a spring summer special, and then the mayor gets sworn in right after. Option B, which is what would happen after March 5th, is that we go to a November regular election, but the person who gets elected at the regular election gets immediately sworn in after certification. So that's what happened with Menino. So I was pointing out that the current HRP sort of changes the situation from that. It has the person get sworn in January, so it's a departure from the charter. And so my proposal was just, and let me just see if I can click quickly, was just to basically simplify the language so that we're just really clear, like, hey, we're going the route of our charter that doesn't use a special, but sticks with all the other charter provisions, just from a kind of
understood.
Legislative simplicity in it, and by not introducing language that references the acting mayor and everything, you just keep things, I think, a little bit tidier in terms of just it being really clear the intent and not having any unintended consequences.
Very helpful. Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I had a couple questions just to make sure. So we're going through, and we're going back now through, after me, we'll just go through another round of questions and suggestions and hopefully get closer and closer to consensus. So I just want to put it out there. I actually don't think, again, I do believe a permanent change is worth the conversation. And I do think it's important that we talk about it as a permanent change because we don't want anyone to think we're just being reactive, right? We all see this as a problem. It should have been taken care of before us. And it's been handed to us now. And I actually think it speaks to the heart of this council that we're going to try and handle this moment and also handle the permanent one for future councilors. So that there is no sense of bias, tipping hand, nothing. We want to do one and the other. So that's just be clear about that. The other component in talking and hearing and by the way, I think Ms. Tassinari had to leave. So I apologize for folks. That's why I wanted to get her in and get her the opportunity to speak. But I do think that there's I'm not going to whoever the original scriveners or writers of this charter, whoever they were, I'm sure they did their best, but there's a lot of confusing, conflicting, not clear, not absolute things in there and I'm not even talking about changes, which we know we have a change actually pending. I'm talking about just interpretation, like understanding what the goals are. So I would put it out there to my colleagues that we consider possibly a task force for a comprehensive home rule petition, not this one, that looks at kind of making sure these things are cleared up, the permanent change and so on and so forth, and have a robust conversation about that. Because I believe to Attorney Tassinari's, to her credit and to her goodwill, she's happy to be a part of that conversation to make sure that there's certain things that need to be clarified, corrected, and streamlined for future. So I think that this is the fact that this prompted us to do more work speaks to this council, this body, and the fact that we want to do the best to make the democracy as grow in our city. So I wanted to put those two things out there. I am still struggling, however, with the flexibility language. Like so for folks to understand, you can send a home rule petition up with language that says this shall pass in the form it is, in period, or without that language, which would allow for the State House to kind of go through it. And the reason why I say this is because I have my own trauma, if you will, from having a home rule petition go up, do well, come out of committee, and then be told because it couldn't be fixed, it was killed at the State House. I'm talking about just cause eviction. And so my concern, again, I understand the great will and love of our brothers and sisters at the State House, but why, like, help me, Councilor Arroyo, why wouldn't we want to make sure that they don't have an excuse not to fix a problem that they may find? You know what I'm saying?
I think the biggest issue here is that it does not limit their ability to make edits. And so if there's no limitation to the ability to make edits, there's really nothing to stop them from proposing or putting in other amendments. And that's the major issue. There's no limiting aspect to that for me. And so I would hate to see this become a political football on the Hill where they're putting in their favorite thing, or that somebody is suggesting putting in their favorite thing, and then it becomes either held up due to the time that it takes to go through that process, or that it ends up not with the intent of the Boston City Council and the city of Boston, but rather what, say, no offense to whoever, I don't even know who the state rep of Chicopee is, but what the state rep of Chicopee may determine makes the most sense.
We just like saying Chicopee. We just like saying Chicopee. It's a fun name.
It's a fun name for us.
It's no offense to anybody.
So I would like I would like whatever we send out there to reflect the intent of this body, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, and the concern could be that other overreach from someone who's not elected by the city of Boston, even beyond because again, just to remind the public, when it goes to the State House, that's literally every single town outside of Boston also gets to impact and influence this language as well, not just our hardworking, good friends in the Boston delegation. I'm going to, I see that Councilor Bach has raised her hand. I still have a couple things I wanted to go through though, and we'll go back to you, Councilor Bach, on the round. So I think I have my question resolved, and I think you would prefer this vehicle, Councilor Arroyo, where the stopgap language that we had discussed before. Councilor Flaherty, I see you raised your hand. Again, we're going to come back through.
Yeah, just had a suggestion to Councilor Arroyo's concern, that's all.
But before you do yours, I'm going to ask my question. Okay, so damn it, I have a chain of thought. Councilor Flaherty, let me think. What are they talking about? Flexible. Oh, stopgap. So I
Stopgap.
understood that you would prefer that the language not deal with any potential other scenarios in this home rule petition, and that we deal with a scheduling, misfire or scheduling race in the order. For example, the order that comes out, if it's assuming Councilor Bach, or excuse me, Mayor Walsh leaves earlier, faster than the State House can act. Okay, the vehicle that's supposed to order the special, we will correct or account for the pending legislation in the State House in that. That is your preferred method, not in the home rule petition.
No, yes, that's correct. And I think we could probably do that quicker that way, because I believe the order is ours and it doesn't go through the House, the Senate, and the governor. So we have the ability to do that, I think, quicker and more expediently that way. I would rather do it that way than attach it to this. That's correct.
Okay, so in terms of the actual suggestion that the language creates an option C versus the option B, what are your thoughts about that?
So here's the honest truth. I think from the standpoint of the stability of the city, it makes sense to do some transitional time there for whoever the incoming mayor is. I also have concerns. The only folks that I know who are currently running for mayor who have announced are councilors. And so this creates specific issues with, if a councilor at large comes in, you might have Councilor Alejandro Sanquillen finishing up, I think 3 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever that is. You create these different issues that sort of come from that. And I guess the question is, I think we can obviously do this the way it's written. There's nothing that stops us from sending it up the way it's written. It would be accurate to say that it's an option C, which I agree with Kenzie Bach on that, Councilor Bach on that it would be adequate to say it's not exactly as written from the charter if we made that change. And so I guess the question to my colleagues who are here is, does it make sense to attempt to ensure stability, ensure that we have this sort of transitional time from whatever that time is, mid-November, to January 4th or whatever the date is that somebody's being sworn in? Or do we think that even though that transitional time might be as little as 10 days or 7 or 6 days if they do it faster, that kind of upheaval and the kind of cascading effects of that, it's better to do that under the current conditions that we're in right now? That is the whole purpose we're changing the special. I just kind of want to hear what folks' thoughts are on why we would do that, as opposed to doing the January thing. And then I'm happy to take it from there. But I do want to hear folks' thoughts on why they believe that it would make more sense to do a 10-day or possibly quicker, according to Sabino, transition of power in the middle of a state of emergency, when what we're talking about is the difference of about 5 to 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks at the earliest, for that, most of that being major holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, right? Like I'm just trying to figure out why we think that would make more sense under the conditions we're in than what is currently written. And then I'm happy to opine from there. But I haven't heard much of an argument for why that would be better or why we would risk one over the other. I have heard that we are changing and there's deviation, which is fine. I actually agree with that. That is deviation. So thank you, Councilor Bach, for pointing that out. But I do wonder if the intent of what we're trying to do here, which is to keep the city stable, keep the city running healthy, if it makes more sense to make sure that we create that transition so we're not going through 3 mayors in the year 2021, and rather we're creating a place where we have a transition. It's a safer transition. We're not dealing with these cascading effects that we can't account for, like whether or not it's a councilor at large or a district councilor who's losing their counselor for the rest of the year. Right. And so those are the kinds of things where I don't know if those are the kind of impacts we want to have with 7 or 6 weeks left in the year when we don't have to do that. And so I guess that's the question for Councilor Bach and others who may be thinking it makes sense to make a transition within 7 to 10 days in November. I'd like to hear why we would do that, as opposed to, and whether or not doing it for those reasons outweighs the significant risk and the significant issues with stability. Because I don't think anybody here believes that the transition, even that, Council President Kim Janey is getting, is traditionally a sufficiently long enough amount of transition. God bless you if you think it is, but I don't think that what we're talking about for a city of, I think it's in the thousands and thousands and thousands of city employees, if it makes sense to force the incoming mayor to have that kind of transition. And I'd be happy to hear from the body on this, because this is something I'm open to discussing, because I think this is honestly where the consensus would have to be, right? Whether or not we make this particular change. I'm happy to hear from this body why they think those kind of risks are worth putting the city through. So.
Thank you. So just to answer it then, I think one, because there's one issue of just being, as you said, as streamlined and as little changes as possible to the charter. So I would like to, that's one reason, right? So we're going to change, right? If we're going to change, I would like to do as minimum as possible, because we just talked about other vehicles and other conversations that are deeper and longer that we need to have. So I want to keep the streamlined change as much as possible, and not and actually follow the charter, at least when it comes to the way that the transition of power would go. Number one. And number two, I actually think I actually think that there's, in an election year, we were always going to have at least one major transition, or at least two mayors, right? And so this is not, I actually think that as an acting mayor and as a leader, we will be able to have enough lead time and enough transition for the new person to come in, and for us to maintain stability in the city of Boston. Why? Because the people of Boston would have chosen this leader, and they want their chosen leader to be in power as soon as possible. And I think that is what the charter sets up for, and that is what the person that they are choosing to lead the city through these bumpy times, through these insecure times, through these insecure moments, they want that person in power to do that. And so I support following the charter and eliminating the special election with this particular language. I also think that we don't know who will win. It could be an at-large, it could not be. But if it is not one of the at-large city councilors, then they would just serve out their term as normal, and we would just have continuity of all seats until the end of the year.
Just to correct on that one point, if it is a district councilor and we did this change, what would happen is the district councilor would immediately become the mayor, and their seat would be empty as a councilor. So their seat would become vacant until that person gets sworn in January. That's actually what would happen. And so considering that we have two at large, two district, or one district rather, and Andrea Campbell, there's a question as to whether or not that impact is worth it. And I will also just say, with the Menino election, I went back and looked at this. This was weird in terms of how it got done. And the reason why it was weird and how it got done is they were running into, as we all know at this point, the 16 weeks before or the 16 months after an election. 16 weeks is actually 112 days. Menino was sworn in as acting mayor on the 113th day. And so they avoided that special. But that was not a mayoral year. That was actually year 2 of Ray Flynn's term, Mayor Ray Flynn's term. And so what ended up happening for Menino is that November municipal election that was not actually a scheduled mayoral, it was actually a scheduled city council election, somehow became a mayoral. And instead of actually just finishing the rest of his term, which would have been 2 years, 1993 to 1995, it became a brand new 4-year term, 1993 to 1997. It actually changed our electoral schedule. And I'm sure Councillor Flynn, who was very close to that, could speak to that. But it was not normal. It was not a mayoral year. It was year 2 of his time frame as mayor. He was elected in 1991. Special was in 1993. It wasn't really a special. Somehow they made, in a way that I don't actually know how they did this, created a new mayoral election and started a brand new 4-year term. And so 1993 is a little bit strange, to be perfectly honest, in terms of all of those components, because I actually, looking at the charter, couldn't figure out how and when they announced a regularly scheduled mayoral election when there wasn't one for that year. So I still don't know. And maybe Kenzie, Councillor Bach, in your research, you were able to come across how that occurred. But that was a city council only year that became a mayoral year and gave him a brand new 4-year term rather than finishing up his last 2-year term. And I think the components of that are so complicated and strange that I don't know how that that necessarily serves here as a guide necessarily. But what I will say is, you know, if what we're talking about is, you know, a 7-day transition or a 10-day transition making sense, I don't think anybody here truly believes that that's a good amount of time for a transition. And so, you know, if the question is it's democratic, which I think is what I heard, Councilor Edwards, that basically this is the person who was elected by the city, right, to be their leader. I hear that, but I also know that if that were this year and Mayor Walsh was running for re-election and he had lost, that person that they had duly elected would actually be the person who would be taking place in January. And so I understand that the difference here is the acting mayor is not somebody who was ever duly elected to mayor. I recognize that. But the charter that we've written gave them that ability in this space. And so the question is, if what we're really doing here and all we've heard from community is worries and concerns about stability, worries and concerns about what that could do for the city, does it make sense in the interest of, you know, safety and for the city's stability and for that incoming mayor, for all of these different things, does it make sense for us as a city to immediately transition a mayor in November? That's really the question for me. And I've heard from Councilor Edwards, and I would like to hear from other folks. I think I know based on Councilor conversations, but I would like to hear from other folks as well. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. So Councilor Arroyo has a question on the floor about specifically this particular amendment and how it relates to stability. We're going to go back through and through our questions. We'll start off with Councilor Bach, then Councilor Flaherty, then Councilor Brayton. And you can ask the questions. You are free, obviously, to go beyond this. Okay, just want folks to know. But Councilor Arroyo is specifically asked this good question. Councilor Bach.
Thanks so much, Councilor Edwards. Yeah, I think there's, you know, I think there's 3 major reasons here. So one is that what we're basically doing with this home rule petition is we're postponing people's right to vote on their mayor by, let's say that the final election like happened in late June right now, right? So July, August, September, October, November. So we're postponing their right to weigh in on that by 5 months. I think that, and we're doing it on the basis of an emergency. And I think that was why it was so important to have the hearing on Tuesday, because I think that it legitimates a trade-off there, right, of the democracy versus stability point, that you have people speaking for that delay. But I think that when you do something like that, the onus is then on you to make sure that you've given people their democratic selection right as soon as possible. And the reality is that speedy transition that you're talking about, although like, of course, like not ideal in the sense that I think a stately transition, you know, it always gives you more runway, but that's in fact what happens in any special election, right? Because the idea is, all right, well, we need somebody who's been elected by the people. And then as soon as that happens, the people get their person. And I will say, I think that if you asked mayors who have taken office in the past, I don't think that the 2 months, 6 week transition is enough either. It seems like everybody learns on the job in this job. So that's one thing. And I don't think additional stability really holds here. I think like the calendar year idea is doing a lot of work there. Like you're saying like 3 mayors in 1 calendar year, but like the reality is, to Councilor Edwards' point, you're going to have 1 transfer of power. It doesn't, like if it's November or January, you're not adding transfers of power. You're just making a switch at some point. And I think, so that's one thing, is just like the democratic piece. I think that the acting mayor power is really important. I know that there's a whole back and forth about that. But I would say, I think from a, like having full powers, full appointment powers, all that jazz. I think, again, we've got a good reason to delay that moment that's making us all want to vote for the home rule. But I don't think that we have a reason to delay that moment longer than we must. And I think the third thing is that it gets back to honestly your point and the way that like you framed it several times, right? Which is this kind of go to option B. I think like that's what Lawrence did. That's also like, if you think about a skeptic at the State House, because obviously we're all trying to avoid having a skeptic at the State House slow this down. And I think the number one way we can do that is reach consensus here. But I also think somebody could be like, oh, now you're picking and choosing and you're creating a third option and all of that. And I think that if we just say, nope, we've literally just made it so that if this had happened March 6th, we'd be following that order. I think that it puts us in a much stronger place when it comes to kind of gamesmanship. So those would be my three things: the need for the acting mayor powers, the kind of the fact that as a democracy, we always want to put kind of the democratic rights to choose your leadership, especially in a strong mayor city, first and foremost. And then the fact that I think we should just be following the charter, even though we think it needs a lot of work on a permanent basis. Thanks, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously concur with the previous speaker as it pertains to the amendments, and it strikes the appropriate balance and compromise with foregoing the special per the charter, and then obviously giving the voters, the residents, that option and having the duly elected mayor. And there are differences with respect to the powers of an acting versus a permanent. And we see that not just in a corporation like Boston, but you see it just in about everything in day-to-day life. It could be the president of a college, a university, a hospital. It could be a commissioner within the city of Boston. And when they're acting, it's different. And if there's anything that brings about more stability, it's when that individual or that leader becomes permanent, when they get the full title and they get the full powers and the benefit of that title, is when an organization stabilizes. Anytime anyone is acting, you got everybody on eggshells and with respect to appointments and people coming and going. So I can make a strong argument as to why when the appropriate time comes, when the people of Boston elect who they want to represent them as mayor of Boston, that as soon as we can get that person made permanent, the better and more stable our city in this corporation will be. That's one. Two, just a question, and Christine can correct me if I'm wrong, and this is to Councilor Arroyo's concerns about making sure that the document doesn't get changed, which I wholeheartedly agree. In the past, just on my experience, we've added the term like unamendable, and we've also put in that can't be changed, but for like clerical reasons only, or for spelling and syntax. So that may be something that may or may not be needed in this situation, but just to guarantee that the document doesn't get amended or major changes are not put in play with what we as the members of the Boston City Council wish. So using some terms like that have helped in the past. Whether it applies here or not, I'll defer to you, Madam Chair, and also the lead sponsor. And then lastly, I think there was a mention in terms of when there's a vacancy at the district council level. It's been my experience, and we've had several of them, that it's the at-large councilors that kind of step in and add support to the district councilor's office. And many of those positions are still there, and those people are coming in every day, answering the phones and doing the work. And we've had a number of instances, several of my colleagues, my former colleagues, Councilor Jim Kelly passed away in office. Councilor Brian Honan had passed away in office. Councilor Yancey at one point was very ill and was hospitalized for an extended period of time. So we, as at-large councilors, had sort of stepped in and assisted those district colleagues in their effort to kind of keep things moving within their office, returning phone calls, responding to constituent service issues. So I would assume the same in this instance when a district colleague elevates to acting mayor. And I think also a point of reference to Councilor Arroyo, he may want to, for institutional knowledge, you may want to reach out to my former colleague and former district attorney, Dan Conley, because I think Dan was the beneficiary. He ascended, I think it was through a special election to succeed former mayor Tom Menino, but also former councilor Tom Menino. He may have some his own interpretation, and it might be helpful in some regard, but I know the same thing applied where at the time Menino vacated his council office, and then it created a situation where I think at-large members also helped out and assisted and serviced those residents as well. So hopefully that's helpful, but again, just want to strike a compromise and do what's fair and gets the body to be on the same page with respect to, if we're going to forego the election, then let's have someone permanent as quickly as possible to provide that stability. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Braden, Councilor Mejia, Councilor O'Malley. I'm sorry, Councilor Bach, I just saw your hand. Did you have something quick? Really quick.
Very quick. Yes, I meant to say this in my marks. I also totally agree with Councilor Arroyo about making it uneditable. I think that that realistically, like, The problem is both that they could overreach, which you and he mentioned, but also that even just a disagreement about potential edits between members of the State House could hold it up. So I just think
Thank you.
it's better to not have it be editable.
Thank you. Counselor Brayton.
I think further to that point, if we go with a very simple fix to the situation, to the language, and make it uneditable, keeping it as simple as possible and with a very clear intent, I think is the way to navigate this. And I am also inclined to agree with the charter as it stands, because unless we're not going to change it at this point, to stick with the existing language as far as possible, but with regard to when the duly elected new mayor is sworn in, I think we should stick with that at this point, because otherwise we're opening up a bigger canvas to work on that would require a separate process to amend the charter. So I'm inclined to leave well enough alone in that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Counselor Mejia, the Counselor O'Malley, and Counselor Flynn.
Yes, I am always curious as to now, as I continue to navigate this political life that I'm in now, I'm always trying to figure out the whys. We are always at conflict with things, and trying to figure out the point of tension here. And if I'm following this correctly, the acting mayor, who would be the president council, Kim Janey, will have to give up her, the transfer of power will happen in November as opposed to January. That is what is in question right now. And so I'm curious, aside from the charter, are there any other reasons why the need to swiftly shift power? What is it about it? Is there something that I don't know about that you guys know that I don't know in terms of the why, or is it just the charter? I'm just curious.
But that's been the conversation. We're discussing all the whys.
So it's that. Okay. That's it, right? Because there's always all of these things here in this council always just remind me of the whys. I think, I don't know what the difference is November to January. It's like, what, 2 months? There's the holidays. What's happening in November and December? Councilor O'Malley, you've been in your position far longer than anyone else, based on your personal experience. Is there anything that I don't know about that happens in November and December in terms of shifting power and, what's this point of tension? Can you school me? Why not let her finish her in January, given all of the instability that we already face, the fact that we're in this global pandemic, the fact that a lot of people don't even trust this government to begin with, that transfer of power. What you are the historian here through the chair. I would love to hear O'Malley.
Just wanted to note, we technically have Clarity version 1 and 2, as he likes to refer to himself, who technically probably has the historical perspective. The question was for Councilor O'Malley, but I did not want to ignore 2.0 and 1.0 of Flaherty. I didn't want to ignore that. So I'm going to
I hear you, Councilor Edwards, and I totally, appreciate and respect Flaherty's seniorship in the situation, but O'Malley is always the one who's all about the rules and the procedures and protocols. And I'm just so curious because he knows all of these beautiful words. And so I'm just hoping that he will bless us with some.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Chair Edwards. I don't know how beautiful the words will be, but I'm happy to answer the question. And I will just stipulate from the offset that sadly, I don't think I can hold a candle to being the council historian. Forget about Michael Flaherty when it comes to Dr. Kenzie Bach, who literally has her doctorate or her PhD in the classical history. So I will happily cede the title to her. But just to answer your question, Councilor Mejia, and I'm parroting a lot of what was said by Councillor Bach, by Councillor Flaherty, by Councillor Edwards. I think the rationale of there's no question that the charter has flaws in it, and the charter has been amended, will continue to be amended, and there's opportunities for the charter to be amended. But it's a good roadmap, and I think the reason why you would have I think the case has been made as to why we should deviate from the charter and cancel the special election that would normally, let's assume Mayor Walsh is sworn in or confirmed as we expect him to be next week. So let's assume that he would resign upon his being sworn in as labor secretary. That would typically, as you know, necessitate a special election according to the charter, because it would happen well before March 5th. And that special election would likely, of course, be in May or June. And then that would be the preliminary. If there were more than 2 candidates, then the final would happen after that. So while I appreciate the rules and protocol and procedure, I think the most compelling argument for getting rid of that special election is the fact that we are in a pandemic, and there have been other issues raised. Cost is not one that I agree with it. If anything, I think we should be spending a heck of a lot more on all of our elections and our procedures to address barriers to voting. But the fact of the matter is because of state law, and this is a large quibble that I have with many in our state legislature, particularly the Secretary of State, we cannot offer no excuse absentee ballots, which means there could be a health risk. And that's enough for me. Anything we can do to protect the health of Bostonians, we ought to do, even if it means deviating from the charter to get rid of the special election. So I will happily concede that point. Obviously want to do what is safest for my constituents and my neighbors and our family. The reason why, and I wouldn't even qualify this as, I think you said tension and some other words. I actually think this is probably the best conversation that we have had on this process over the last 3 weeks or how long we've been having this discussion. I think there has been some, I think it's the conversation has deviated a bit, but this is actually a very honest and I think hopeful conversation on what we should do. So the reason why I support the initiative that Councillor Bach has managed today, that would put us back in line with the charter, despite the fact that we would potentially get rid of the special election slated for the spring/summer, is that it would go back to revert to making sure that whomever is elected mayor at the typical municipal election this November would be sworn in upon certification, which, as we know, would be 10 days or so, with the potential that it could be longer. This is my long way of using these beautiful words to get to the point to answer your question. Okay. The reason why it's important to swear that individual, whomever she or he may be, upon certification is that it establishes that person as the full mayor as opposed to acting mayor, which there have been some concerns about powers. It allows that person to serve with the mandate of having been elected citywide with a majority of the vote. And thirdly, it does create better stability for the office because it's a duly elected individual. Now, the point you can make is, well, what's the difference between November 16th and January 4th? And you're right, it's not a long time. But the Menino example that I use, and again, I'm well aware that that was a non-mayoral year, and it's why it changed things off, changed the calendar, because of course, Ray Flynn, Councillor Flynn's dad, was elected in 91. He decided not to seek re-election. The change here is that it was a special election, but it was still in concert. It was close enough. Mayor Flynn did not resign until I believe it was July 13th or 14th. So it was that short period that would then allow for the special election with the typical municipal election. So actually, to Councillor Flaherty's point, I don't believe former DA Conley served in a special capacity. I think he was just elected because Tom Menino had foregone running for re-election to his District 5 seat. I, on the other hand, won a special election, had a less than 2 week transition before I was sworn in. And in that time, as was correct, it was about a 3-month period where my predecessor had stepped down. So there was no District 6 councillor. And of course, other district councillors. Just so happened there was an at-large councillor from JP and an at-large councillor from West Roxbury at the time. So District 6 was well taken care of during the interregnum period.
Okay,
but
O'Malley, you're going to take up my whole little time. Let's get to the point.
You will have the time. Councillor Mejia, you will have the time to finish after him, but you did ask him.
O'Malley, get to it.
He'll answer.
Well, I've gotten to it, Councillor Mejia. The question is that it can create swearing in a mayor who's elected citywide after the election in November will provide for stability for the city. It will clear up confusion around acting mayor powers versus full full mayor powers or just being mayor powers. And it also provides the mandate that that individual will have, having been elected citywide. So those are three reasons that I think are quite compelling.
Yeah, and I would say, Chairwoman Edwards, no more from O'Malley this whole session, okay?
I didn't say that. I did not say that.
I'm teasing. So I do have so thank you for that dissertation, O'Malley. Really do appreciate it. But I do have another question, right? Because for the folks who aren't paying attention to politics, like so many of us do, it'll be quite confusing to go to that every year, whenever we have a mayor, that transfer of power happens in January, right? So I just think that this notion of stability, I think it would be confusing for a lot of folks to have a mayor come into office this cycle, this year instead of the next year. So I just think that would be a little bit awkward for some folks who aren't uber political like some of y'all. And I just think that there's something to be said there in terms of the stability. And I think that some people will question whether or not we feel safe. And so I just want you to just be super mindful of like the optics and what this is going to say to a lot of folks who are paying attention and thinking about this transfer of power. And I'm just going to name it because it's always the elephant in the room. And, regardless of whether or not you like where it lands, I'm just going to speak it because that's just who I am. It's just that, and I don't want to just bring race into the and gender into this, but, as a woman and as a woman of color, it just feels to me that there will be that residue in terms of who is the person that's assuming this role and this need to hurry up and get her out of it, regardless of how the charter was written. That residue and that feeling is there for some folks. And I know that, as legislators and as policymakers and as folks who are representing 22 neighborhoods, as me, as an at-large counselor, that I'm here to represent all, and all means all, but I would be remiss to not kind of bring that voice into the space in terms of the why we're pushing so hard to get this, to transfer the power. And that may not be what the driving force is behind any of your intentions, but, I just think that people of color often feel like there's always a motive as to why our power is always trying to be minimized. And so I'm saying that out of a feeling. It's not a fact. And, but I have to always speak what's in my heart. And I know it may land the way that it lands, but I wouldn't be myself if I didn't name it. And so that's kind of why I'm struggling with this whole transferring of power situation, just because I feel that, it could be construed in so many other ways for those folks who are paying attention. So that's all I'll have to say about that piece.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And then I'll go.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Just to answer, to be brief on that question, I would recommend that when the mayor is elected, that in November, that mayor be sworn in as soon as possible, or as soon as the results are certified. I certainly know of all the candidates that are, this would probably be irrelevant, but I certainly know that all the candidates that are running would be able to hit the ground running to be mayor. And with the help of the city council and with the department heads, there'll be a transition to make sure that mayor is successful. And of all the candidates out there, there's so many great candidates, but I would like to see that mayor have the full function of the job, provide as much stability to the city, provide as much leadership to the city as possible. And that's my recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I meant to call Councilor Campbell before I go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I defer to the majority of my colleagues on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So just also wanted to also note that, again, the goal of today was to come to consensus, and I'm feeling there's consensus around several things. One, to maintain, well, there's consensus and agreement with Councilor Arroyo on, I think, 3 points. One, that the language should not be amendable. 2, that there should not be a permanent change in this. We also agree that with Councilor Arroyo that we should also not try to do any stopgap or kind of defensive move, depending on an unknown date or time in which the mayor may leave. And then there is I think there is growing consensus or majority consensus on assuring that the language that we do put in is simple, is consistent with the charter as it is written right now, and also doesn't add any additional definitions. So essentially, I hear consensus with foregoing the option C as proposed by Councilor Arroyo and sticking with the option B, which is to just maintain the charter as is for the rest of it. So that's where I'm seeing as the chair where the consensus is going. And I'm going to come right to you, Councilor Arroyo. You raised your hand.
Is the floor mine?
Go ahead.
And so I would just say that I agree, Councilor Edwards. What I've heard is the permanent change should be a separate vehicle, which is one that I'm happy. It sounds like me and Councilor Bach are probably the most passionate about this, and so I'm happy to take on that work with Councilor Bach. So that sounds like one thing. When it comes to the legislature having amendment language, it sounds like we're in broad consensus not to do that. I certainly don't want to do that. On the structure of the wording, specifically how we make it the most simplistic possible way, I like Councilor Bach's suggestion about after March 6th, but I wonder if it would make more sense not to just copy the actual language from the charter, which says as if after 16 months or something like that, because that's the actual language in the charter, whatever it is, rather than the exact date. But I think these are quibbling over little things, and I think we can solve that. The only issue that I have is the date that we choose as the transfer of power. Clearly, as written, it says January. I think it is actually true, and I agree that the charter seems to make explicit that November would be what it would be if we followed through that way. And though I don't necessarily agree that it makes the most sense in a pandemic or in a state of emergency, I also, hearing folks' concerns, hearing where folks are at, I also agree that this is something that we can do. I think if we want to make this as simplistic as possible, if we want to follow the charter, to me, that sounds like a doable change. I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a difference of like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 weeks. So, I think there's a number of cascading issues that would come from this, depending on how that goes. But I also don't think it's a matter worth putting this special election change into danger. Mm-hmm. And so if the question here is about finding consensus, after hearing from my colleagues and their concerns, it sounds like the only point of contention is this. And if that's the only point of contention, then it's something that I'm willing to come to consensus on, even if it's not something which I want to be clear, I don't actually believe it's what's in the best interest of the city, but I do believe it's what's in the best interest of building consensus. And so if that's where we are, then I'm happy to move forward on moving in a direction where what we're saying is just what the charter says, specifically in the way that it's written. And so I'm happy to do that. And I guess the one other question that I have, because as an attorney, this certainly seems final to me, but I'm assuming there's some reason why we're expecting that this isn't the case. Section 2 says the provisions of this act shall take effect immediately upon passage. To me, that reads like even if we have a special already called, if this gets passed at the highest level, which would be the governor's pen, that immediately it takes effect, which to me would cancel that special. And so I'm just trying to figure out if we actually think that Section 2, which says the provisions of this act shall take effect immediately upon passage, doesn't already override a call for a special election.
Since I'm the one who I'm going to go ahead and answer that one on your Section 2, it very well could, Councilor Arroyo. I think, there was a lot of who knows if we were going to support an amendable version. All these different things were flying around with what would ultimately be at the State House. So it could very well do that. I still, even with the timing, would cover, want to cover the body and want to cover the city by making sure this separate vehicle also mirrors that goal. That's all.
I agree with that. You're saying doing it on the order also mirrors our goal?
Still, yes.
Yeah, no, I want to be as safe as possible. So I think if
Yeah.
that does it there too, that's great. But I'm just saying the way I read this, even if we had already called for a special, the provisions of this act shall take effect immediately upon passage would immediately revert us back to no special, is how I feel about that language. And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting that language, or if other folks agree.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so I agree. We're just talking about the stopgap, and I agree with that too. And so it sounds to me, and I'll let you kind of, if you want to poll it or whatever, but it sounds to me like if that change goes directly to the date of taking office, if that change goes back to, I guess what the charter would have expressly said, which is that November change, it sounds like we have almost unanimous consensus, if not unanimous consensus with folks here. And I think in the interest of that, it makes sense to adopt that change if that's going to get us to unanimous consensus.
Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. I agree with you. As I just said, I think the consensus was around the agreeing with you with 3 points, and then also this Councilor a box amendment. And so the consensus being that we did, again, just congratulations to my colleagues. This is what, to the State House, this is how we do work. Publicly, honestly, directly, considering all things and being very real. So I want to thank everybody for bringing up the questions of race, bringing up the questions of power dynamics. Those are good things, Councilor Mejia, and I appreciate you putting it on the table, because I don't doubt that you are representing a lot of people who are concerned about that as well. So, and I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for this amount of work. We do, so again, to the public, and I'll go through another round, but I'm having heard from the lead sponsor that he agrees with these things and these changes. I don't know how much, unless people have other additional things. I think we could conclude this working session. I will provide or draft a committee report with amended language to be filed on Monday so that we can get this, so that we can get this filed and voted on Wednesday, February 3rd. So to my colleagues, unless you have any additional questions or work to do on this particular draft, I will close out this working session. So I don't see any hands raised.
Just a question,
Oh,
Councilor.
man. I should have just done it.
You should have hit that leave meeting button. The question,
good day, sir.
The only question I have, because I think this was a very productive working session, I do thank all my colleagues for coming with their working hats on, is in terms of the final draft and the final language, what is the process now? Obviously, I would like to see and sign off on those, because if we're making amendments through the friendly amendment process, I'd like to sign off on what we end up doing. But,
you got it.
So how do we do that? Is your office, how are we gonna handle that part?
Yes. So for the public to know, through Christine, as government ops chair, she's the attorney for the government ops committee, right? And so what she does is works with the lead sponsor of any matter, whether it's Councilor Arroyo, whether it's Councilor Flynn, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Mejia, and myself, to make sure that the committee report that we have to draft, which is a summary of the conversation, is accurate. And then also that the final version is also accurate and in line with the intent of the original sponsor and consensus of the body. And that's what Councilor Arroyo and I will be doing through Christine.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Edwards. I just want to say thank you to you as the chair for an excellent meeting. Not having a special election, I know we'll be able to engage our constituents, but I also think it's critically important that our immigrant neighbors are engaged in this election, and having that time without the special election will help that matter. A lot of immigrants, especially in my district in Chinatown, almost have been inside for the last year because of the pandemic, social distancing. So I know they will be looking forward to engaging with the candidates, you know, in the spring and the summertime and fall as well. So I think this is a real good opportunity for our city. Boston works best when we work together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Mejia, then Councilor Brayden.
Yes, thank you to all my colleagues. Really do appreciate. I'm gonna go to Kennedy Box's class so I can learn how to do those PowerPoints. But no, seriously, thank you. This was really informative. I really do appreciate Councilor O'Malley too. He's good. But no, seriously, all jokes aside, thank you. I am curious though, because I don't really like surprises. So I understand that Councilor Arroyo has asked specifically about, like, I don't want to get to the voting day and then have a whole bunch of little theatrics when it comes to voting, like, oh, this, that, or the other. So I just want to be really clear that I'm walking into this because we all have agreed on some consensus that when it comes to vote, no one's going to come out the floor with some other surprise that I didn't talk about here in this working session, that I'm going to have to get a thesaurus to try to decode the Da Vinci situation when it's time to vote. So I just want to understand what for my own purpose, because it takes me a while to process things. I want to make sure that we're not going to, when it's time to vote, there's going to be a surprise, something that I didn't hear about in this session, that somebody's going to come out with some language that I'm going to have to, decipher. I just need that sense of understanding from this situation before I walk away. Like, I need to know.
Thank you very much. So it's a procedural question, Councilor Mejia, and I really appreciate that, because as you are correct, people want to know how this plane is going to land, right? And so Councilor Mejia is correct that during our votes on Wednesdays, people may propose amendments. They may propose language to final things to be voted on. And some of those things are just to correct things, and some of those things are to change things. She is absolutely correct. I don't believe that is in any way, shape, or form anyone's idea. The whole point of having this working session today, this fast, was so that we got it all out on the table, any concerns people have, to hurry up so that there is nothing to be left for the floor to be had. And I can assure you that I am going to draft the home rule petition that represents the consensus that we have heard today. And if any of my colleagues, who it is their right, by the way, would like to propose an amendment on the floor without having shown the rest of us, I doubt that person will be very successful in any way, shape, or form after this much work to come with some surprise.
All right, I appreciate that, Councilor Edwards, and I know that Michael Flaherty is shaking his head over there. So I know you're always good at raising your hand during those meetings, Flaherty. So I just want to see what you got to say about that situation too.
I concur with the chair.
Before you go, Councilor Flaherty, we've come too far to not go this far. We are going to get this done in a consensus mode. Before you also go, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Brayden's hand was up.
Good.
And then you can go, Councilor Flaherty.
I just want to thank you all for your sticking with it and talking through all these issues this afternoon and coming to consensus. I really appreciate the work that Councillor Bach has done. I really appreciate everyone's participation, the maker and the chair. Everyone has done great work, and it's certainly been very helpful for me to get my head around understanding the procedures, and really thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, I would say, for a great working session, and also to the lead sponsor and all my colleagues, and to Councilor Mejia's point, obviously at any time pursuant to the council rules, anyone could stand and make an amendment, but I concur with the chair that given the diversity of opinion that's at this working session and sort of the consensus building, and obviously the chair working extremely hard, and also the lead sponsor, and also Kenzie Bach's efforts today with the amendments, and there's a consensus here. So I concur that I don't think that we're going to see much activity on Wednesday, if that helps our colleague, but nonetheless, everyone's reserved the right and can file an amendment, and or a colleague could see something that we didn't even discuss today, potentially, that may add value, may not add value. So it's always open, but happy to always have that discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair. Everyone have a great weekend. Good work today.
Can I speak to that concern, Madam Chair, just about surprises? Because I want to make sure the public, obviously the public has a heightened sensitivity around this issue. And I just want them to be clear that, I think everybody here is attempting very much to work towards a consensus that is in the best interest of the city of Boston. And so for me, I think this working session was a good reflection of that. Everybody was coming together with sort of, these are the reasons I think this is the reason why I think that. And so what I would just say is I support Councilor Mejia's instinct on that about, we've had last minute amendments. I would just say I would not be in favor of last minute amendments on this particular situation, just because of the amount of conversation that we've had around this. And I want people who are watching at home to understand that I'll be working closely with Councilor Edwards on whatever the final proposal is in front of the body. And that I do consider that document that will be presented on that day will likely be a very much a consensus document. And I'm hoping we are looking at as nearly a unanimous, if not a unanimous decision there. And I think that's where we've headed. So I appreciate Councilor Mejia's concerns. I share them, but I don't believe we'll have that arise. And so my hope is that we move in that direction. I just want folks to know that as the body, we've done a lot of work here to be very concise. And I think Councilor Edwards, whatever she presents on that day will certainly be something that has been finalized in conjunction with myself, the maker, but also taking what we've taken from this body. So there's not going to be anybody necessarily changing anything behind the scenes that nobody's seen. That's not going to happen.
Thank you very much. So this time, leaving it to no chance that anyone's going to have some concluding remarks. Have a great weekend, everyone. This working session is ended. Good day.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.